Hey everybody, Josh the ReGamer here. So I got a lot of comments about, hey, we want to see your setup. We want to see how you game. How you have everything set up and set out and all that and plugged up. And so I did a quick video to kind of show you guys how I have things set up, talk about some of the consoles that I've picked up and all of that. So take a look. Let me know what you think. Again, always like, subscribe, share with your friends, and let me know in the comments about your setup. Here we go.
Hey everybody, Josh the ReGamer here. So I'm going to take you guys on a quick tour of my setup. So kind of did a quick pan there. I'm going to go up here. There's the receiver, record player. Go back down. There's all the other stuff underneath the PVM. We're going to just talk about all these consoles. I'm going to give you kind of a quick history of how I got them, where I got them, and how I have them hooked up. Just so you can kind of get an idea of how my setup is. Okay, so first let's talk about the audio setup. So this is a realistic STA 2000D receiver. My dad actually bought this receiver back in 1979, I think, or 1980, brand new. And this is what we had in my house when we were growing up. When I was growing up, and basically everything was hooked into this. We had a tape deck, we had VCRs, we had a phonograph, we had a couple other things that were all hooked into this receiver. It's a 75 watt or 85 watt per channel receiver, which is pretty awesome still even. I think this series got up to like 100 or 125 watt per channel, but 85 watts per channel is pretty solid still. I mean, it was a pretty awesome receiver, and it did a good job for what it was. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, see if it focuses a little bit better. Got some glare on it there. But yeah, so right now I've got all my systems hooked up through a switch, through the audio, and I also have this phonograph here hooked up through it, which I found at actually a second-hand store here. It's also a realistic and would have paired with these receivers. This phonograph might be a couple years newer than this. My dad said he still thinks he has his original realistic one, so I might still see if I can get that one instead of using this one, but this one works great. I got a needle for it, and it's been doing good. So I don't know if you can, I'm going to tilt it up a little bit. I can show more of that in a second here. But anyway, basically you power it on here, and I love watching all the stuff light up, and you can see in the corner here the little wattage there, and then depending on the auxiliary, so phono up at the top here, auxiliary 1. I actually have RGB, all my RGB systems going into auxiliary 1. All of my S-video systems go into auxiliary 2, and then I think that's actually all of my S-video and composite systems are going into auxiliary 2. And then I've got the Genesis, since it's its own little stereo out the front there, basically coming in through the tape deck auxiliary in there, which you have to do by kicking that up. So, but yeah, it's pretty awesome. So I might do some whenever I turn on the systems later. I'll have this on as well, and you'll be able to hear some of the audio and all that from it. I pretty excited about this. So I've got this hooked into 2 different speakers, and so bear with me here for a second. So first we've got the speaker down here. This is my left speaker, and then we have the right speaker over here. And these are the Nova series from Realistic. These series speakers came with this system. And well, actually they came with the system that was before this system, but they're still of the same line. The Mach 1s are what my dad had with this system. I just don't have room for them right now. They're pretty huge speakers. So I'd like to set those up one day eventually, but right now probably not, because they're just too big and I don't have really a lot of space for them. So there's the audio setup, and now we're going to move into the consoles. Alright, so on to the first setup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the oldest consoles and the lowest video quality, and then go from there. So the lowest video quality I have in my setup right now is Composite. I have had RF set up in here as well, but for right now I managed to get everything to Composite that I play pretty frequently. The only thing that's not Composite that I still play occasionally is the Intellivision, which I don't have set up or out right now. So I'm going to go from that and jump into the ColecoVision, which is next. So you can see here the ColecoVision. I got a game up here. I got the dust cover for it. This was an original dust cover that came out at the time, in the mid 80s, I think. They made covers for all different systems and things like this, and you could find these like third-party covers and stuff pretty easily. You know, they had like the fabric on the inside and stuff, and I don't know, I think they're pretty cool. But so here's the ColecoVision. So what I've done with this guy is I've actually modded it for Composite, which you can see right there. I've got my Composite pins there, little gold pins. You have to take the board apart. There's a little basically companion chip board helper that boosts the signal, and you have to tie it into the board, and then that gives you, you know, true composite. So the other interesting thing about this system is you might have noticed in the label here, there's a lot of writing. There's English here and there's French up here. Same thing here, there's English on top, French, English, French. This is because this is a Canadian model ColecoVision. It's basically brand new. When I found this, I mean, it was pretty much new in the box. You can see right here, expansion module, and then they got the French there, video game system de video. I don't know French, but so anyway, I think that's really cool. And if you look at the bottom, it's got a different serial number, and in the box there, you know, the box had some of the same type of things for it. So I was like, well, that's awesome. So it was in really good shape. I have another ColecoVision that was kind of rough that I had, you know, gotten to work, but it was having a lot of problems with the RF, and so it was really nice to get this and do a composite mod on it. And I love the ColecoVision. I think it's a really fun system. You know, it's got your number pad here. You can put, it had overlays that you could put in for those, and your joystick's pretty good, I think. You know, your buttons there. You also could use the same connector that like the Atari 2600 or Sega, like Sega Genesis, Sega Master System, the same connector that they used. So you can plug in a Sega controller and play your ColecoVision games, which is pretty amazing. So the game that I'm probably going to show off later, that I want to show you guys on the ColecoVision, is Donkey Kong. So Donkey Kong was a really great game on the ColecoVision. I was really impressed at how close it was to the arcade, especially coming off of looking at like an Atari 2600 Donkey Kong. It's like night and day difference. So I'm going to take a second real quick and fire this up, and then I'm going to show you that gameplay real quick, and then we'll continue on. Alright, so in order to get the ColecoVision playing, I'm going to have to show you real quick my switch box here. I'm going to do more in depth on this in a second, but that bottom one here, this has got my composite systems as well as the S-Video pass-through, which is coming from here, and the S-Video goes from here into the PVM. So number one is the NES, number two is the ColecoVision. So we have to set that on the ColecoVision, and then I'm going to back out. We're going to move over here to the PVM. So I'm going to have the PVM set up on the S-Video input, which I already have there. And now I'm going to power on the ColecoVision. Maybe. There it goes. So it's showing up now. I mean, it's really good color and composite. I don't know if you can even quite tell in here. I feel like the screen doesn't do it justice, but you can hear the audio coming through the receiver now as well. And here we go. So, I mean, the sounds, like, you can tell there's less ladders and things. You know, not as many obstacles. But I mean, Donkey Kong looks really good. Paulina, your little Mario, they all look really good. Gave me points for that, but it didn't tell me it was. I don't remember if it does. I guess it doesn't show you the points above it. And it looks like it's reversed too from the arcade. Like on the arcade, I think you're going up the other side. So that's a little bit off, but dang it. But I think they did a really good job with it for an arcade port. I mean, I was pretty shocked at, you know, just how well graphically it looked compared to the Atari 2600. So there's the ColecoVision. I'm going to do some more with the ColecoVision here in a second, and I'm going to go explain that to you now. Okay, so the other neat, cool thing about the ColecoVision here is they came out with a module with expansion modules, and this module is the number one module, which was to let you play Atari 2600 games. So it's got an Atari 2600 slot, all the buttons you would need on an Atari 2600. Basically, you just plug it into the front expansion port of the ColecoVision. You pop in your game. There you go. And then you plug up your controllers here instead of, you know, where the ColecoVision has them. So I would really like to know how much of the processing of the game the Coleco does, if it just handles like video, audio, power, or if, you know, everything's done inside of here, or if there's more done inside of the system. But I'm going to show you this real quick. So I'm going to plug this in. And in case you hadn't seen here, so this is my little Atari stick. So these stands, I actually found this stand at Goodwill, and it came with this little red ball here. It was basically you just put in your Atari joystick controller in this stand. It's supposed to help you hold it a little bit better. You could set it on a table better, and then I guess this is to give you more of a arcade stick feel to your controller there. But basically you hook all that up, hook that in. And then now, because I've done a composite mod on this, it's actually playing Atari 2600 games in composite. So that's pretty amazing. So same thing, I'm going to move back over here real quick to the TV. I'm going to slide you guys back over here. Then I'm going to power it up. And now we get Xenophobe instead of Donkey Kong. I pulled out the cartridge just so it didn't cause any problems. But so yeah. All right, so we're starting. I have to reset it to get it to kick off here. There we go. Actually, might have just went, but I chose this game because it has really good graphics, pretty good audio. This is pretty late in the Atari 2600's life cycle. This may have been the last game actually that came out for the system. Crap, he got me. I think it's super fun. And there's still a lot of Atari 2600 games that I'll pick up and play. And it's really nice to be able to play them like this. Don't have to set up the Atari through RF or do a composite mod on it. I can just play them through the ColecoVision with the original controller, joystick, and all that. So there you go. That's pretty awesome setup for that. So that's also composite for the Atari 2600. All right, so not a game system, but the last thing I wanted to mention on my little tower over here is the VCR down there. So the VCR plays a vital role in two things. One, I have a couple VHS tapes still, and so it's really nice to be able to play those. But also, I have some promo tapes that I found at the thrift store that were for, like, one was for Street Fighter, one was for Banjo-Kazooie from Blockbuster, and they're like little promo VHS tapes that they sent out to like promote the video or promote the games. So I can play those through here, but also this works as a good pass-through for RF stuff. So if I was to bring out the Intellivision or hook up the old Atari, or the Atari 5200, I could run it through this into the VCR and then run it composite out of the VCR into my setup, so that way I could play it all on the PVM. Because the PVM doesn't have the demodulator to take in the RF input and figure it out and actually have the signal display, because it's basically just a monitor, it's not a TV. So I hope that makes sense. But anyway, I can go into more detail with that maybe in another video if you guys are curious. But so I use this. A friend of mine, he had an extra VCR laying around, so he hooked me up with that. So shout out to Zach, thanks for that. Actually, I'll talk about another system in a little bit that Zach gave me too. So he's hooked me up on a couple things. But there you go. So that's the first start of the setup there. And now we're going to move on to my last composite system before we jump into S-Video and RGB. All right, so my last composite system is my NES. So I have not done an RGB mod or S-Video mod or anything else on the NES. I left it pretty vanilla. I did make a couple changes to it. I still have the original pieces too, but I was hesitant to move or change any of this stuff because the story behind this is, like I told you before, my friend Zach, this is kind of what jump-started me getting back into collecting a little bit and getting back into old video games, retro games. So I was 21, I think, or 22 at the time. So almost 10 years now, 10 years ago. And Zach has always been into old video games. And I would go over to his house and we'd play all kinds of old school games. We'd play the old NES, we'd play the Super Nintendo, 64. He had, Atari. He had a couple other old like Pong systems and things like that. So I'd go over there and we'd play all kinds of old school games. And it was nice to get like, a refresher in some of that old school stuff. Well, he was a big NES fan, and I told him at one point, I was like, man, I really wish I had my NES again, because I had played one in like college or something, but I never actually owned one. And he was like, what, you never had one? I was like, no, I never had any of these systems really growing up. And I said, I'd really like to get one, sometime soon and play it. And so he was giving me some ideas of places I could go check it out and find one. I was like, okay, cool, thanks. Well, little did I know, a couple weeks later, for my birthday, he gave me this NES, and he gave me 2 controllers and a gray zapper and a couple of games with it, and basically jump-started me into being able to play the old NES again. And I was super excited about that. And so I still have it, and the only modifications I've done to it are, the first one is I installed the blinking light win, which you see Castlevania there, but if you see this little strip under here, it says keep calm and don't press down. I'm a huge fan of the blinking light win. It is basically a whole new tray and pin connector that bypasses the region mod without having to mod the board or anything. Bypasses the region lock, excuse me, not the mod. But you don't have to mod the board with that. And also the way the tray is designed, the cartridge goes in completely horizontal, like very straight, parallel to the ground, horizontal. It's not at an angle. You don't have to press it down, anything like that. So I think it also holds, it helps with wear and tear on the cartridge, on the pins, and then on the connector itself. The other modification I did just recently, because I was playing around and I had some extras, is I put in a blue LED, which didn't exist really at the time, so I was thinking maybe I should swap out and put in a green LED. But I don't know, I kind of like it, and it looks more purple here on the video, but it's definitely like a darker blue. I think probably what you're seeing on the side there on the black, or maybe in the reflection, is a little bit more accurate of the of the color. But anyway, so I'm going to hook that up. I'm going to show you what that looks like on the PVM. I mean, I think it still looks really good, especially on the PVM. So I'm going to go ahead and switch that to my first input on my little selector switch down there that I told you guys about. I'll turn the TV back on real quick, and then we'll power it up. And then we should be, at good old Castlevania. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and start it so you can get some of the audio now that I've got that hooked up to you. Oh, I'll just let it play the demo. So there you go. There we go. I want the actual. There we go. So yeah, I mean, I think it looks really good, honestly, for Composite. I think it's really well done with the NES. I'm surprised they put Composite with it, but they did, and it's pretty decent, I think. I would like to get it to RGB at some point. I just haven't decided to dive in the $100 for the chip and to get the and then all the work. I don't have all the right tools to do the whole mod correctly. I could probably do it with what I have, but I feel a little bit intimidated by it. So I might try it, but I'm not going to try it on this system for sure. I might try it on another one first, and then if it goes successfully, then maybe I'll do this one, but we'll see how it goes. Alright, so I'm going to talk to you guys real quick now about the video setup as we move into the S-Video devices. So basically this bottom switch, as I mentioned earlier, is Composite and the pass-through from this. So this is all S-Video devices. So I've got the PlayStation, Dreamcast, GameCube, and I had the 3DO all hooked up S-Video through here. These pass through to this fourth input here, and then there's an out on the back. It actually has 2 outs on the back of this that go into the PVM. And because this is a powered switch, powered amplifier, basically it can take Composite or S-Video signals and push them all out through like S-Video. So I don't have to have a separate Composite cable coming out and a separate S-Video cable coming out and a separate audio cables for both of them coming out. It all gets pushed over one output. It doesn't upgrade, obviously, the signal any. It just pushes it over an S-Video line instead of just the Composite line. So number 1 here is the NES. Number 2 for here is the ColecoVision. Number 3 is the VCR. And then the 4 is the pass-through. And then we have the PlayStation, which I don't have fully hooked up right now. Dreamcast, GameCube, and 3DO. And this one's just really empty right now. So I'm going to show you kind of how all these are hooked up. This was just a Pelican switch that was from GameStop back in the day. You can still find them though, and they came with these little name badges that you could swap out that had like pre-printed stuff on them. So that was kind of cool. And then over here, I've got my G-SCART SW Lite, or GWS SCART Lite, which I'll link to that in the description. It's awesome piece of hardware. It's an automatic switcher that basically the community came around and this guy built this. There's two different things kind of like this. There's the Discart Lite, then there was the normal model, like the I guess the original model. And then there was also another guy who did one called the Hydra, which works very similarly. And it's got two SCART outputs on this one. I used to have stuff hooked up to both of them because I had two PVMs set up, but now I'm just doing the one big PVM. And then I've got all the consoles that I have RGB, pretty much all of them run through that switch. So whenever you power them on, it automatically picks it up on here, pushes the signal to the TV through RGB. So that's pretty awesome. And all the audio, basically, whoops, I just lost my mic there. So all the audio basically comes off the output here. This cable goes to a BNC connector, so it's a SCART to BNC, and it has audio breakout, and the audio breakout I have running up into the receiver. So, and then from here, I have the audio coming out of here, running into the receiver as well, so that anything composite or S-video gets pushed into a single input on the receiver. Anything RGB gets pushed to a separate input on the receiver, and I mean, that's pretty much how it's all set up. So that's the video switching video setup there, and now we're going to continue on with the S-video stuff. So for the start of S-video, first we're going to talk about the Dreamcast. So this is the Sports Edition Dreamcast, which had a black shell instead of the typical white shell, which you saw a lot of times with the Dreamcast. I actually do have the white shell version as well, and I had them kind of half and half, where I had like the black shell top and then the white shell bottom, and I thought that was kind of cool. But I went back to just this because I really like just the sleek kind of black shell look. But anyway, I also did make a little modification to it. I put in a blue LED for it as well, and I think it looks a lot nicer than the bright orange one on the system, especially with the black shell. But for this, so we're going to need to move over to the fourth input here. So that's coming in from here, and then we need to switch this to the Dreamcast. And now, bear with me just a second here. I'm going to scoot the camera over. Whoop. There we go. Dreamcast. So don't have a game in there right now. But the controller I'm using is also this one, which I did a video on. So you can go back and check out that video. This is like the fake wood grain controller, brown wood grain. So this was from basically from the Sega Dream Bank that they did for a while, which were basically anytime you bought Sega products, you could get Sega points. You could save up those points and go spend them on their online store and get exclusive items from there. This is one of those exclusive items. The only time you could find it, only place you could find it was there. It's got the black sticks and controller there, the brown, which I really like the brown look too, the black cord and all that. And there was a matching VMU unit. I haven't been able to find that yet, so I'm on the lookout for the fake wood VMU unit. And this is just plastic. It looks like wood, but it's not really wood. But anyway, that's pretty cool. So I've got it hooked up S-video here. I think it looks really great for S-video. This is using an official Sega S-video cable for the Dreamcast. I have done VGA out of the Dreamcast as well, so you can get full RGB. But for most of what I do, I like it on the PVM, and S-video looks really good to me, I think. Alright, so I'm going to show you the startup screen for the Dreamcast too. I feel like that gives you the best view of the clarity and the sound. So yeah, I think it looks really pretty, even though it's just S-video. So I mostly just use it S-video. It's still a big step over Composite, or anything less than that, especially on this system. Alright, so next up, hidden away down there, we have the GameCube. So I really love the GameCube. I don't have a huge library for it. I only have about 10 games for it. But as you can see from that little disc down there, I do have the Game Boy Advance attachment down there, so you can play Game Boy Advance games with the CD there. And it does have both the inputs on the back, both the digital out and then the standard multi-out, which I know you can find those component cables that are super expensive and hook those in. Or there's a guy that's made an HDMI piece now that you can plug in there. But I just use it S-Video. I really like the S-Video on the GameCube. I think it's some of the best S-Video that I've ever seen. I would say the Composite to S-Video on the GameCube is a similar jump from the Composite to S-Video on the Super Nintendo. So it looks really good, honestly, in S-Video. So I've been using that, and I'm going to show you a quick little power on and display of the S-Video through the PVM. I mean, I'll let you guys be the judge, but for me, it's really good, and I'm fine with that, especially because I don't have a huge library. I don't get to play this system as much. You know, we have definitely some good Smash gaming tournaments occasionally on this, but you know, I think it's great for what it is. I don't think RGB would give me that much of an increase on this one just because the S-Video is so stinking good. So again, we're gonna leave our let's see here. We're going to leave this the same, except we're going to switch to GameCube. And then I'm going to move the camera over here, and then I'll go power it on so you guys can watch it power on. Hey, everybody. There we go. So there it goes. I've got Super Smash Bros. In there. So, yeah, I mean, I think it looks pretty good. Yeah. And it might even look a tad bit better than you can see in the video there, but to me it's pretty solid. So I'm happy with it the way it is with S-Video. Alright, so the only other stuff I have hooked up S-Video is the PlayStation and the 3DO. I actually don't have the 3DO out right now because I only have one game for it, and it's fun to play, and it also plays audio CDs, I think, but I just don't have enough space for it. I mean, I could probably get it worked in, but I didn't want it to be too cluttered. But I also have the PlayStation. I don't have the PlayStation fully hooked up right now. I actually have to get out the power cord and hook it up. It is hooked up with the S-Video, but I unhooked that too just so I can show you guys the system a little bit. So I've got my little memory card there. Here's the back of the system. It's not the one that has like the composite on the back. But if you look at the bottom here, you'll notice it says, let's see here, NTSC J. So yeah, this isn't a North American system. This is a Japanese system, or an Asian model, and I found this for, I think it was $5 actually at Goodwill. It was by itself like that, no memory card or anything, no cables, nothing. And I was like, oh, I don't have a PlayStation yet. Like, I'll just pick that up. I'll see if it works, take it home. So I took it home, found a power cable for it. Didn't have any composite cables for it, so I had to order those. I called a friend of mine, and I was like, hey, I got this system, and he's like, well, I think they're region locked. He was like, so you might need a Japanese game. It might not play a North American game, because I asked him if he could like come over and bring a North American game, and I was like, well, crap. And I was like, okay, well, I said, I'll order one, and then I said, maybe you could come over, bring some American games, and we'll just see what happens. And because it was at, you know, I live in America, and it was in a Goodwill store, so he was like, okay. So I ordered the cheapest Japanese game I could find for it, and when that and the cable showed up, the composite cable, I hooked it all up, and it played, and it worked, and it played the game fine. And so then I told my friend, I was like, man, I really wish we could have some other games, you know. And he was like, well, here, just pop this in and see if it works. He said sometimes, you know, American games, North American games would play on other systems. Not usually, but so I tried that, and it played. It played his North American games as well, and I'm like, what the heck? And both of us were kind of dumbfounded about it. I mean, nothing looked special about this, and I was like, I'm gonna have to open this up and clean it and see what's going on. So either later that day or the next day, I opened it up and looked inside, and there were all kinds of wires going all over the place on the board, and I was like, somebody's modded this. I guess it was a really early region mod, potentially, or something. Or maybe it was used in some kind of development thing, or it was used to bypass some other stuff. I don't know. Or maybe one friend of mine suggested that it might be able to play CDRs, you know, just and rewritable CDs or something. I guess bootlegs. And I haven't tested that out yet, so maybe it's capable of that too. I don't know. But if you guys know anything about any kind of variants of these things where people would do early modifications on them for, I guess, region lock or things like that, it looked like there was a lot going on inside to just be a region bypass, but I don't know how complex that was on the PlayStation. So anyway, I probably should do a full-on video of it sometime, try a bunch of different games and discs and just see what happens. But that's the story with that one. So that's also hooked up S-Video right now, as well as the if I bring out the 3DO, it has the 3DO has S-Video out and Composite out built into it, and I have the second model 3DO, which was kind of like the second model Sega CD, where it's got the it's all solid state and it's got the door flap that opens. The Model 1 3DO had the tray that came out, was kind of over-engineered, kind of like the Sega CD Model 1. So I'd like to get the Model 1 3DO at some point and maybe some more games for it. I just haven't focused a lot of time and effort on it yet, but I really do like the 3DO. I think it's kind of a unique and interesting little system. But there you go. So that's all the S-Video ones, and now we're going to move into talking about RGB. Alright, so one of my most favorite RGB systems that we're going to start off with is the Sega Master System. So this is a Sega Master System, Sega Master Power Base model here. There were several models of this released. This was the first model that came out in the US. It would also take card inputs for games, which you can kind of see right there, kind of like a TurboGrafx, or cartridges would go in there. And it's just a really cool system. I really like the Sega Master System. I think it had more colors than the NES did, and it came out in 1986, so right after the NES debuted, and really the year that the NES kind of got big as well. But it does RGB out by default, and it also, a lot of the systems had built-in games that you could play without having to have a cartridge in. You could just power it up and play them, and I'm going to show you that here in just a second and show you what it looks like in RGB. But I really love this system, and in the front here you can plug in your controller, and again it's the same port, so you could use a later Sega Genesis controller or other controllers to control your Master System games. You didn't have to use the Master System controller, so I think that's also pretty cool, and I'm going to show you more about that here in just a second. I'm going to plug it up, and well, it's plugged up. I'm going to power it on and show you the setup for that. Okay, so the only prep work we have to do for RGB is move this to auxiliary 1 to make sure it gets the audio, make sure these aren't switched any other way, and we should have audio here in just a second. And the automatic switcher that we've got down here should cover the it turning on. It should, when we power on the system, it should pick it up here and push the signal automatically to the PVM. So I'm going to set this back here and set it down so you guys can see. There we go. Alright, I'm now just going to power it up. Oh, I need to turn the TV on too. I guess that would be helpful. I need to turn the TV on and put it on RGB, which is line 3 on this. By the way, this PVM is a 2950Q Sony Trinitron PVM. It's like in a cube shape, so it's 29 inches, but it's really only 27 inches viewable. But it's still a honking machine. So there we go. Powered it up. So you can see right off the bat there, you could play basically Hang On or Safari Hunt just without any system, without any cartridge in the system or anything. That was just built into the game, and different models had different games built in. Sometimes you can tell, I think you can find out by the serial number. You can kind of, there's some forums online with some guys that have kind of mapped it out, so you can figure out which games you can play. But I mean, already it just, the colors are so vibrant, really sharp, looks good. I don't know, I love the Master System. Later on, a lot of Sega Genesis games got ported down to the Master System because the system itself was so big in like Brazil and some other countries that Sega actually kept supporting it even until I think like 2008 or something crazy like that. So, but yeah, the Master System itself is pretty huge outside of the States as well. So anyway, just kind of a cool little show there, and we're going to move on to the next system now. All right, so bear with me a little bit. I'm going to have to freehand these down here because the tripod won't go this short. But the next one up is the Genesis, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to basically talk about each of these systems, and then I'll run through their setups because the audio on this one is different than the other RGB systems. But so basically with the Genesis here, I have it on a Sega CD Model 1, and that is one that I found that was broken, and actually was able to repair it, and it was super over engineered, and like this half of the system down there, like this whole side, is basically empty. The whole Sega CD, all of the contents are right on this side. I think it was mostly so it would fit with the Model 1 Genesis. So I have the Model 1 Genesis with the high definition graphics logo and the non-TMSS version, which means the one that doesn't show the little like warning screen, I guess copyright screen or whatever. And then I've got a 32X on top of that, and then a game plugged in there, which is a great game. Guy Race is a great shooter game. So that's kind of my setup there. It's all RGB as well. I have the audio coming out of the front of the system here and running separately into the receiver. So I get stereo, true stereo sound, because the back of the Genesis didn't have stereo coming out of it. It was just mono. So that's the best way to get stereo sound out of it without having to do any kind of crazy modifications. Or, you can do it. I think the Model 2 had stereo coming out, but with the Model 1, that was the only way that you got stereo. So moving on down the line here, we have the TurboGrafx. Let's go over here, TurboGrafx 16. And if you look on the back there, I've got what's called the engine block, which Stone Age Gamer sells that. It lets you do basically S-Video or RGB out of your TurboGrafx. It plugs into the back expansion port of the TurboGrafx, which is pretty cool, and uses the Genesis Model 2 cable to SCART, which is how I have it hooked into my system. And then I've got Keith Courage plugged in there. So the story with this system is actually pretty interesting. I found it on Craigslist, and it just said, TurboGrafx box, and they had a couple pictures of it, but they didn't really have any pictures of the system. They had a picture of the box and of the foam inside the box and all these different angles of the box, but that was it. And I was like, well, I'll take a chance on it. And I contacted the lady and went out there and met her, and she actually lived a couple hours away from me, and met her, and it turns out that her boyfriend had given her the system back in the early 90s, and I think that he worked for Babbage's potentially, and she took it out one time, literally plugged it up. It's like, oh, that's cool, and plugged it back, put it all back together and put it in a closet, and there it stayed for the next 20 years. Until she decided to sell it because she was cleaning out her closet. So I got it from her basically brand new with the box. So if I'll go up here, so there's the box up there actually for it. Still in great shape, had all the foam, came with Keith Courage. Also came with clacks, complete in box. And that's why I think that he might have worked for Babbage's and picked up a game for it, because it said Babbage's on it and it had the original like $49.99 price tag and all of that. So I'm thinking that he thought, oh, this might not come with a game, so he picked up a game with it, and to make sure that they had something they could play, I guess. So that was kind of cool, and I love it. I love the TurboGrafx. It's a ton of fun. Really like the system. Someday I'd like to get the CD attachment for it, but it's super expensive and they break really easily. So might not ever do that. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. But moving on, we'll go down here to the corner here. So this is the Neo Geo AES. So there's a Japanese model and American model of this, and I have the American one, which basically, they're basically the same. It's just different serial numbers and a different, like one has a FCC sticker, but basically they're the same machine. So this is a consoleized MVS arcade system, essentially. The Neo Geo is awesome, and here's the control stick for it, which basically is an arcade stick with a clicky. I love the clicky wheel there. But yeah, it's a amazing console. A lot of great games like Metal Slug, and a lot of arcade like King of Fighters, and a bunch of really great games came out on the Neo Geo. The games are getting really pricey for it. But you can still find some cheaper ones, and you can find some Japanese ones that are pretty cheap. And there's even a multi-cart out now for it, so you can play all different system games. But the cartridges are humongous, and I have like a third-party memory card right there that was actually made by I think the community around the Neo Geo. And this one actually has a UniBIOS installed, which basically bypassed the original BIOS. So you could play other regions, you could play Japanese region games or US or European. And you can also play the AVS version of games or the MVS version of games, which is kind of cool. So that was pretty neat. I've got it hooked up RGB as well. Going all through the system, just straight RGB from the system. It actually output RGB by default, as long as you have the right cable. So continuing on, we have the Super Nintendo system here, and I wonder if let me see if I can get it to focus any better there. So Super Nintendo system. There's not a whole lot to be said about that. I can tell you the story on mine. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you're pretty familiar with the Super Nintendo. But basically, I got this one online. The lady, she didn't sell a bunch of game stuff, but she had a few game things, and they were. It was boxed. It was a box system in a supply closet for, I think, some kind of electronics store or something. And they basically went in there and were cleaning out that and selling a bunch of stuff that were in the surplus. That were in the back of it. I don't think they were the ones that worked at the electronics store. I think they came in and were cleaning it out and selling what they could. And so she found this Super Nintendo box, put it online. It actually had mice had eaten the corner of the box, and it had just been sitting for a long time. And whenever I got it and opened it up, it was basically brand new. The system, I could tell, really hadn't been used, maybe not even powered on. Or tested, and it still had all the plastic bags with it and everything. Controllers were basically brand new. You can just see still how clean the system is, how intact everything is, how it's just not very dirty. It's also a late model Super Nintendo, so it's a one chip, which supposedly the one chips have a little bit better RGB output. So it's a one chip -01. There was also a -02 and a -03. There was a couple different revisions of that. As well. So anyway, I thought that was pretty neat. And then moving on, we have the Jaguar. And also the Super Nintendo does RGB out by default. And if you're not doing at least S-Video on your Super Nintendo, you need to, because it makes a huge difference, especially on CRTs and PVMs. I highly recommend that. So next system up is the Jaguar. This system is one of those that it didn't do super hot during its time frame. It was a kind of almost a budget system, like Atari was kind of on its way out. It was the last Atari console, but I love the Jaguar. I think it's kind of cool. It had a pretty small library and only a few really good games, but it also does RGB out. You just have to get the right cable, and you can hook into the expansion port on the back of the Jaguar. And the game I have in there right now is Wolfenstein 3D, which is an amazing game. I think the Jaguar version is probably the best port from the PC of the game. I would say it's the closest console version to the PC without actually being the PC game. They did a really great job with it. It's a lot of fun. I really like that. I like the controller. I really enjoy playing the Jaguar. So I've got that hooked up through RGB as well. And now we're going to move over to the last couple RGB consoles, and then I'll show you everything hooked up. Alright, so next up we've got the Nintendo 64. This is the Funtastic Smoke Series 64. I've also got the DK Banana controller there. But the Smoke Funtastic Series, if you don't know, the Funtastic Series were like a bunch of see-through consoles. They had like a grape, like a watermelon, a grape, they had like a jungle green, a fire orange, a couple different ones, and I really liked the smoke gray system there. It was kind of see-through, which you can see. You can see the expansion pack there, and you can see into the console, which was, of course, a huge thing in the 90s, having see-through electronics and plastics and stuff, and I always thought that was really cool. I did also modify it to have a blue LED. It was actually one of the first ones that I modded with the blue LED. This system I got right before I went to college. I actually always wanted a Nintendo 64 and never got one growing up. I think I got really close one time, but you know, the system was so expensive, and then the games on top of that, and at first it didn't come with any games, so that was a big pill to swallow. So I never could convince my parents to get one of those. But later on, I was able to get one before I went to college. I went to Player's Choice, which is a local little like used game store, and I bought this for $50. It came with the controller, the expansion pack, and the system. And then I bought a bunch of games for it. I bought Mario Kart, Super Smash Brothers, Super Mario 64, Star Fox, GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, a couple other of the big like titles that I remember playing as a kid on my friends' systems when I'd go to their house and visit. Pokemon Stadium. I think I also bought Pokemon Snap then. So just really awesome, and I'm glad I got them when I did, because they've all gone up in price now and are a lot more expensive to get a hold of those. But they're so much fun, and I still play them all the time now with family or friends that come over. We'll still bust out the 64 and play a lot of 64 games, because they have some great party games on there too, and some great multiplayer action with the 4 ports. You know, it's a big deal that a system had, you know, 4 built-in ports and games that actually utilized that and took advantage of it. So I've done the very basic RGB model in this, which is just the little THS 3717, I think, chip or something like that. It's not the more advanced chip that's out now that will actually let you add in the deblur and all that too. So it's just the basic RGB chip, so it still has the blur effects and all that. I might change that out and upgrade it to the newer RGB chip at some point. But right now it's RGB going out into the system, and I mean, it looks fantastic. You know, just playing the 64 in RGB, so much better than kind of the washed out composite, especially on more modern TVs now. And with a lot of modern TVs adding a lot of lag and stuff, it just looks really good in RGB on there. The next system is the Saturn. I only have a few Saturn games, but I really enjoy playing the Saturn. You know, my friend talks about it as like the 2D master machine, because I mean, there's so many great, amazing 2D games on here, and you know, like arcade perfect ports on the Saturn. Really like the Saturn a lot. It also does RGB out by default, and in the back there you see I've got the Action Replay. Highly recommend that. You can still get it for like $20-25 online on Amazon or something. It lets you play other region games. It also functions as the memory cart, you know, for saving games and stuff, or storing games. It does have a little save battery you might have to replace in the back of the Saturn. Or that's the battery for like the, I think that's just a battery for the time and stuff. I can't remember if that's tied into the save or not. But anyway, so I really like the Saturn. It's a fun console. Still learning a lot about it. There's a lot I don't know about it. One of my favorite games for it is Herc's Adventure. So if you haven't seen that or picked it up, you should go Google it or YouTube it. It's a pretty fun little game. So those are all my other RGB systems that I have hooked up, which is basically 8 of them. I've got 8 RGB ports on here, so I've maxed out my my ports now. So I'm going to run through each system real quick and power it up and just show you how it switches over and what it looks like when it loads up on the PVM. Alright, well, since it's the only one with a unique audio setup, I'm going to start off with the Genesis, powered up with Gyri's loaded in there. You see it automatically switches. It was on the Master System earlier. And there it goes. So great audio. Stereo. So great game. Highly recommend. And now I'm going to power it off. We're going to switch back the audio so it's the rest of the systems, and we're going to power on the TurboGrafx. So there it goes, loading up Keith Courage. Great system, a lot of great soundtracks on some of the Master System or the TurboGrafx system. So now I'm going to show you the Neo Geo. So there's the BIOS I was telling you about that you can set, and then it should load in Magician Lord. Oh, that's a little loud. I'll turn it down a little bit. It always has a problem with that first load screen there with the unit BIOS. But there's Magician's Lord. I mean, you can see very arcade, arcade graphics and everything. Oh, and it's auto playing, and he got stuck. That's great. Great graphics, great sound effects. I mean, just great visuals. Love the Neo Geo. Great system. All right, next up is the Super Nintendo. Super clean RGB. Love me some Super Mario World. Alright. Next is the Jaguar. Also, you can't power up the Jaguar without a game in it. It will just stop right here. Or it might not, it actually won't even power on, I think. Or if it does power on, it'll stop there. It won't continue loading unless you have a cartridge in there. So if you have a Jaguar that's not loading up, make sure you have a game in the cartridge. Or it might not even power on, honestly. So here's Wolfenstein. And I could let it roll till it gets to a little bit more of the gameplay. Because like I said, it's pretty spot on. The Wolfenstein 3D is the first FPS I ever played, and one of the very first games I ever played on like Windows 95 like PC. I did play some Commodore 64 back in the day. My dad had one of those, and that's my earliest gaming memories. But any kind of like newer 90s gaming, it started off with this Wolfenstein. I mean, even the visual, the audio samples, I mean, the music, everything's spot on. So I'd be curious to know what the differences are, if there are a lot of differences. I think the bar here is a little bit different than what the PC had. But still, I mean, everything else I could tell from the music and the layout and everything was pretty spot on. So I'm a huge fan of that. All right, so moving on, we've got the 64 next. So you see, it's nice to be able to switch on the console. Automatically picks it up. Got Mario Kart in there. Love the 64 in RGB. Alright. And lastly, we have the Saturn. I don't think I have the game in there, so it's just going to do the load up. There you go. It's like, hey, put a game in, or put some music in, or something. So there you go. There's my my RGB composite S-Video setup, kind of how I have everything hooked up, how everything's laid out. And if you have any questions about anything specifically, let me know. I might do some other videos later on of specific consoles and maybe like my top 5 for each console or something. I haven't figured out how I'm going to do that completely yet. But I have been thinking about doing something along those lines. But I've had a lot of people ask me like how I game, like what's your setup, how's your audio video, setup going. So this is kind of what I have right now, and I'd eventually like to get to where I could do some streaming gaming or something like that. And I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to do that. I've thought about trying to hook in, and trying to convert the signals and trying to do a capture card and all of that, but I'm not sure. I'm still working through how I'm going to probably go that route. But anyway, here you go, and that's a quick overview of my game system and my game setups. So thanks again, guys. Like, subscribe. Let me know what you think in the channel. Let me know about your setup. Talk about like how you guys game, or how you like to game, whether it's just with a more modern TV or with some kind of something like the FrameMeister or the OCC scan, or OSCC scan, where you convert it to HDMI to be able to play on a more modern TV. Or maybe you go old school with a CRT or a professional monitor or something like that. But anyway, thanks again, guys, and I appreciate it.